walking through the book of John and looking at the 7 I am statements of Jesus. And these statements are powerful as he is in moments declaring and demonstrating that he is the Messiah. And he's revealing aspects of who he is and his mission and purpose here on earth. And I would encourage you, if you want to understand who God is, these I am statements reveal who he is. But it also reveals who he is to us. And when you see who Jesus is and who he's offering himself to be to you, it leaves you with a decision. And in each moment that Jesus was in these I am statements, he was making these declarations and demonstrations, and his hearers would have been left with a decision. Some of them became angry at his statements. There was religious leaders that even wanted to plot to kill or stone him. There was others that were overjoyed because this was the news they'd been waiting their whole life. And when you look at Scripture and you look at the teachings of Jesus, it leaves us with a question. Who is this man? Who is this man? And who will he be to you? Today we're going to turn in our Bibles to John chapter 14, verses 1 through 7. And we're going to read this in just a moment. But Jesus' statement today is this: I am the way, the truth, and the life. I am the way, the truth, and the life. And in this discourse, this conversation is taking place in the upper room. It's the Passion Week. It's the week that they've come to the Holy City. Jesus is preparing to give his life, to go to the cross, to sacrifice his own life so that people might experience new life and the fullness of life in him. But yet this journey is difficult and different than the disciples thought it was going to be. They'd committed their life to following him, and they expected him to overthrow a Roman government, a human corrupt system. But Jesus came to overthrow death and sin, and so that we might have eternity with him forever. And his statements are beginning to trouble his disciples' hearts. They're beginning to have worry and fear and anxiety over what the future looks like. Have you ever had worry, fear, and anxiety over what the future looks like? Maybe a moment or news or situations crept up on you and the future became unclear, became difficult. Your perspective changed on what you thought life was going to be versus what you think it's going to be now. And from a young age, we're put pressure on what's the future look like. I mean, think about this. In kindergarten, 5 and 6 years old, we start asking kids to decide what they're going to do with their life. I mean, we ask them, what do you want to be when you grow up? That's a lot of pressure. I'm 40 and still trying to figure that out. We should be teaching like 5 and 6 year olds, hey, don't pick your nose. That's the good decision for today in this moment. You know, but there's this idea and pressure that we've got to have everything figured out. But yet life doesn't always go the direction or the way that we think it would, or even we think it should. And Jesus in this moment is talking about the way. And he declares that he is the way, the truth, and the life. And he's hope for troubled hearts. In verse 1, it says this: don't let your heart be troubled. Don't let your heart be troubled. This is an invitation to make a choice. You see, life's about choices and about perspective. Today, you could choose to look at the day as I lost. I lost an hour of sleep. Or you could look to say, I gained an hour of daylight tonight. It's a choice. And whatever choice you make will determine your attitude, will determine your perspective, and it'll determine the way you view things. We each get to live today with the same circumstances and realities in some ways, and we got to make a choice of how we're going to perceive things. Me? I'm thrilled that today is the day. Looking at some of your faces, some of you are not thrilled today. And that's okay. My hope is that by the end you are thrilled about what Jesus is doing and the offer that he has for your life. It says, believe in God and believe also in me. In my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, would I have told you that I'm going to prepare a place for you? Jesus is speaking of heaven. He's speaking of eternity. He's just told his disciples that it's going to require him to die. He says, don't worry. Don't let your hearts be troubled. On the other side of this life is something more beautiful and grand than you could ever imagine. And actually, after I die, I'm going to prepare a place for you, an eternal place, a beautiful place, a place of rest in his glory. If it were not so, I would have told you that I'm going to prepare a place for you. If I go away and prepare a place for you, I will come again and take you to myself, so that where I am, you may be also. And you know the way to where I'm going. Lord, Thomas said, we don't know where you're going. Thomas has a very honest question in this moment. Jesus says, you know the way I'm going. Thomas is like, I got no idea. I got no clue where you're going. How can we know the way? And we're going to center our talk today on this. How can we know the way? Jesus told him, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. If you know me, you will also know my Father. From now on, you do know him and have seen him. Jesus in this moment is preparing his disciples, his committed disciples, for what life is going to look like after his ascension. He knows the journey is going to be difficult, troubling, and fearful. And he knows at some point, either they will make a mistake, or the challenges and pressures of carrying his message will become so great that each will want to give up. They'll each want to give up. They're each going to want to lose their way. And that's not so different than any of us, because in Isaiah 53:6, we're told this: we all went astray like sheep. We have all turned to our own way. Have any of you ever lost your way? Guilty. Guilty. I've lost my way numerous times, focusing on the wrong things and doing the wrong things and allowing sin to take hold in my heart. And Jesus always reminds me, I have a better way for you. On Friday night, me and my wife watched a movie called 13 Lives. It's an intense movie. It's about the 12 soccer players and their coach that were young 11 and 12-year-old boys in northern Thailand, that after a soccer practice, they went to explore a cave. And while they were exploring a cave, a monsoon came down, and they got a couple miles deep in that cave, and all of a sudden, all their ways out were flooded, and they were stuck. And me and my wife, we made a decision after watching this movie. We're not going in caves. We're not. It's not worth it. The fear and anxiety of being trapped in the unknown, and it's this beautiful story of people all around the world joining together with the brightest minds and the most skilled cave divers to try to save these young boys' lives. And it was this beautiful picture of what happens when someone loses their way, gets stuck in a place of difficulty, in a place of uncertainty. Yet others are willing to help them find a way out. I won't ruin the story, but there was things in that movie that I was like, I had no idea that that's what it took to get those young boys out. And we'll find that in our life and in our journey, no one is perfect. No one is so faithful or faith-filled that we get every day of our life and journey right. But yet the grace of God meets us in each and every moment to remind us that there is a better way and to help us live the way and find the way. And so here's our big idea for today. Jesus is the way to find your way. Jesus is the way to find your way. We see Thomas here, and Thomas was very honest. And last week when we talked about Jesus going to heal Lazarus, it was a dangerous situation they were entering into. There was a bounty put on Jesus' head if he were to enter back into that community, but they decided to go to Bethany to raise his friend Lazarus, and Thomas was the one to speak up. Thomas was the one to say, hey, we will go with you, even if it costs us our life. this moment of faith, this moment of courage, this moment of boldness. And then we see just a few days later, Thomas's heart is troubled. He's discouraged. And where there was once courage, he now feels lost. Maybe you felt that way at times. Like you're like, man, there is nothing that can stop me from following Jesus. And then something happens and you're like, I don't know if I'm going to continue following Jesus. That's part of our humanity. And Thomas is in this moment, he's like, God, Jesus, we don't know the way. I don't understand what you're talking about. Life is getting difficult. It's getting confusing. And I find myself pressed. And the way is an important phrase to the early church. The early church didn't actually call themselves Christians. They called themselves the people of the way. Following this statement from Jesus when he says, I am the way. And so they're saying if he is the way, we're the people of the way. We're the people following in his way. Christians, the word Christian became a derogatory comment that culture would use to be like, oh, those Christians, those people that are Christ-like. And they're like, well, that's not such a bad thing. And if they're going to use it to be a derogatory term, we'll embrace it. And so they changed from people of the way to calling themselves Christians. But Jesus makes a statement, and the disciples were left with this moment of, who is this man? Who is this man that claims to be the way, the truth, and the life? And who will he be to us? And so this morning I want to talk to you about 3 ways Jesus invites us to experience his way. 3 ways Jesus invites us to experience his way. The first is this, knowing the way. Knowing the way. Jesus says, I am the way. And when you understand what he's saying, he's making a very exclusive claim to being the only way to heaven. The singular way to experience eternal life with God. We like options. Some of you like driving different roads at different ways to get to work, to get to church. Others of you, you're going to take the same route no matter what. It's so much easier now with apps that you just plug in an address, hit go, and a voice tells you where to go. Anyone remember the atlas you used to pull out on road trips? It was like this big, and you had to look at like mile markers and then find where you're at on the map. And if you missed the exit, there was no voice saying like rerouting. You had to figure it out. Anyone remember printing like 37 pages of MapQuest? And you would staple it and you would flip through it. And if you forgot a page at home, you were lost. You were done. There was no recovery. Anyone under the age of like 24 is looking at me like, what are you talking about? It's the past. You're living in a better moment. Enjoy it. But many people believe that all roads lead to heaven. We think that if people are good people and they're nice and we like them, then surely a loving God wouldn't have them be separated from him forever. And Christianity sometimes gets a bad rap or a tough moment in culture because we're seen as mean or hateful because of this exclusivity. Jesus offers salvation to all. This invitation is open, but there is one way to God. And this isn't the claim of Christianity. This is the claim of Jesus. And either he is true or he's a liar. And if it's true, then this statement causes us to think about, is my way his way? Is my life following his way? Am I committed to his way? If you don't believe this statement is true, then there is no hope for salvation apart from him. Let me be clear. The exclusivity of the path to heaven is not Christianity's idea. It's Jesus' proclamation. There is one road, and Jesus is that road. And we have a choice. We either accept it or reject it. There's no salvation apart from him. There's no way to God on our own. Jesus steps into our need and offers himself as the path. And the difference between lost people and found people is simply direction. It's simply direction. My dad was accompanying me on a hunting trip one time, but his health wasn't in the best condition. And so we made an agreement. We'll go as long as you stay at camp. And I was abundantly clear, Dad, you have one job. Stay at camp. Stay at camp. Say it with me, Dad. Stay at camp. And he's like, I agree. I came back that evening, opened the tent door. There was no Dad. And I was angry. I was like, Dad, we had one rule. Stay at camp. Well, you see, he had heard I was successful and he didn't want me to be trying to get a whole elk off a mountain by myself. So he took off up the mountain, having no idea where I went or where I was. He was just hoping to find me. Problem was, the mountain was more difficult than he had imagined it being, and he quickly realized he was not going to be able to make it to the area he knew I was hunting, so he turned around and began a journey back to camp. But after hours and hours, he wasn't making it to camp. And when I arrived back at camp, it was almost 6 o'clock at night, starting to get dark, and there was no Dad. And everything inside of me began to worry, to be fearful. What happened? And I found another hunter. He said, hey, he went up after you. He went up trying to find you. I was like, I didn't need to be found. I was good. I was safe. He's the one in trouble. He's never been here before. And he got on this trail and he was heading towards the Mount Rainier National Park boundary on an off-road trail at night, with no jacket, with no preparation. And thank God there was a man from Mossy Rock with a handlebar mustache that was riding a horse that was coming down the trail. If you're lost in the woods, the greatest thing you could ever find is a man on a horse that the guy has a handlebar mustache and he's from Mossy Rock. He knows these woods. He knows them like the back of his hands. And he looks at my dad and he says, hey, do you know where you're going? And my dad's like, yeah, I'm going back to this camp. And he looks at him and says, you're going the completely wrong way. You need to turn around and go the other way. This is not the way. You had two people at the same place. One lost, one found. The difference was one was clear on the right direction. Church, can I tell you, following Jesus doesn't make us better. It doesn't make us better than any other person in the world. What it does is it makes us clearer. We understand that there is a way, and His name is Jesus, and He invites us into His way so that as we go into our workplaces, as we go into our relationships, as we go into our families, as we go into our hobbies, we're clear that we're living a different way. We're living for a different purpose. We're clear on the direction in a world that is seeking self-gratification and the pleasures of this world. That's not what we live for once we give our lives to Jesus. Amen. Those who are apart from Him, they live to gratify the desires of their flesh. But those who give their life to Jesus, that give their life to Him and follow His way, we no longer live to gratify our flesh. We live to gratify our spirit. That we are living to lay our life down and do the things that God's asked us to do. And it's a completely different way. You see, Jesus claimed to be the answer to human problems. And the answer is not a recipe or a formula. It's a relationship with Him. And if you've lost your way, if you're confused about what's the meaning of life or your purpose here, and you don't have your sense of value, or maybe you've gone to do your own thing, Jesus, with love and grace, with no condemnation, would invite you into His way, to lay your life down. Because without the way, there is no going. And we live in a world and culture that thinks they're going places, but yet we just create messes and problems when we live according to the desires of our flesh. But when we lay that down and we live according to the desires of our spirit, we see the kingdom of God advance, that joy being flourished, that people being built up and needs being served. The second thing is we're believing the truth. Truth is more than facts. You can't change the truth, but the truth can change you. Over half of the New Testament of the word truth is used in the Gospel of John. This is an emphasis in his book. In a world full of information, in a world full of theories, in a world full of misinformation, we need to be people that understand truth and are exposed to truth. And the exposure to the truth of who Jesus is begins to reveal in ourselves places that we find we've built ourselves on false thoughts and pretenses. Have you ever been exposed before? Like you thought something, you believed something, and all of a sudden you're like, I'm wrong. I'm completely wrong. I call that marriage. There's so many things that I thought, and so many times I think I'm right, and then I have a conversation with my wife, and God gave me someone that is way more intelligent, way more emotionally sound, and she's like, have you thought about things this way? And I was like, oh, that's a completely different way to think about this. You are right. You are amazing. She's like, keep it coming, and there's those moments when you're exposed to truth that it begins to change things inside of you. You see, truth is reality. Truth is the way things really are and the way things are meant to be. It's what seems to be sometimes and what really is are not the same. You ever found that out? Things are not what they appear. You ever been looking for a car and the pictures online looked amazing, and you show up in person, you're like, yo, you did a great job taking pictures. You missed all the flaws, the dents, the dings, the chipped paint. And the truth, once you got up close, was greater than what it was from afar. To know truth is to see things accurately. And to believe what isn't true is blind. To believe what isn't true is blind. And Jesus is not just a mere suggestion. He's not just a good life coach. He's not just really smart and kind. He is truth. And when our lives come into relationship with Him, that truth is beautiful and that truth is painful. The beauty of the truth of Jesus is we see life for what it's intended to be. The hard thing is we see that we fall so far short. But the good news is grace meets us right where we're at. And it picks us up, and the grace of God is big enough for any challenge that we face. The truth of God defines how we relate to one another. We see not just our differences or our challenges. We see the opportunity that God's given us in being together. And the truth isn't just something you know. It's something you're invited to belong to. That Jesus invites you into a relationship with Him, and He is truth. And without truth, there is no knowing. Without truth, there is no knowing. And the third thing Jesus invites us into is to living the life. Living the life. Now, I know when this phrase is used in our culture, and I say, man, I was living the life this week. Usually we think of a vacation somewhere. Usually we think of a big house or an epic moment. But the life that Jesus invites us to live is different than we could have ever thought or imagined. People were desperate for another way to God. Cultures and communities have been looking and searching throughout history for ways to be connected to God. And something about humanity, we're always looking for an easier way that demands nothing of us. It's like a payment program. I've never heard someone say, hey, for 6 really hard payments, this can be yours. No one ever says that. What do they say? For 6, easy. You see, we're drawn to this word easy. We like things to go smoothly. But in the life that Jesus offers us, it's not a smooth or easy journey. It's one with a sure promise at the end, but it is a difficult one at times in the process. You see, Jesus calls us to a hard road of self-sacrifice. In Matthew 16:25, he would say it this way, "For whoever wants to save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life because of me will find it." And the way of living for Jesus is actually one of self-sacrifice where we choose daily to lay down our lives. Now, we live in a culture that's an American culture. We are self-made. We are affluent. We can do anything and achieve any dream. And that flies in the face of Scripture a lot of times. And so we got to choose which way is it going to be. Is it going to be our way? Maybe the way we were raised, the way we were thought up to think? Or are we going to allow the truth of Jesus to transform us and say it's no longer about me, but it's about Him who lives inside of me? You see, you choose to lose your life in order to save it. And in reality, apart from Jesus, there's really no life at all. There's really no life at all. There's moments. There's experiences, but life. I mean, I'm talking about that soul satisfying, gratifying. I know who I am. I know whose I am, and I know what I'm called to do. That life can only be found in Jesus. It's a life that's more intentional. And it's a life that the more mature you get in it, not less is asked of you, but more is. And some of you have been faithful followers of Jesus for many years, and you recognize that. The longer you've been committed and the more you do, the more Jesus asks of you. To him who is given much, much is required. And it's not like as you serve him longer, he asks less of you. Actually, the longer you serve him, the more he trusts you and the more he asks of you. And it's a journey to not be about your life anymore, but to be about his. The level of sacrifice becomes greater and not less. You're like, Pastor, that doesn't sound very encouraging. Depends what lens you look through it. You can look through it as I lost, or you can look at it as heaven's gained. You see, we live in a community where there's 633,000 people that are neither connected to Jesus nor his church. And we can go on living our way, doing the things we want to do. Or we can be Jesus' church, which is called to live a life that's different than the culture and community that we live in. To be a church that values gathering together. Yeah, it might have felt really good to sleep in today. You can be honest. You might have wanted to look at the clock and be like, today's the day I could just sleep in. But you chose to gather. You chose to show up. Granted, you chose to show up to the later gathering. You might have a little more wisdom, but you chose to show up, and there's a beauty when we show up together. That there's an encouragement, a reminder that we're not in this alone. That we don't have to journey alone. There's a reminder that when we pray together, that there is spiritual partnership, that there's spiritual opportunity. And I read something this week that really challenged me. And it says, our prayers are the pen that write the future. Are the prayers we're currently praying right now writing the future that brings God glory into his church? Are the prayers you're praying in your friendships, in your marriage, over your kids, over your parents, are they writing the future? Are they full of faith? Are they full of life? Are they full of encouragement and blessing? We use our gifts to build the church. Why does Jesus talk about money so much? Because he's offering us a different way where money doesn't lord itself over you, but you use it to steward this life, to enjoy some things, but more than that, to build his church. What if you looked at your work week as that there's part of my work week that I'm providing for my family, and part of it I'm providing for the kingdom? And so it doesn't become I don't know if I can give this. You've already given it. You've already given it through your time, efforts. Say, hey, the first 4 hours on Monday, that's for the Lord. That's for the Lord. And what I receive for that, that's going to the Lord. And we begin this perspective that through His church, He's building something. I never understood being a youth pastor. It was easy in the financial specter. I just had to be responsible. And then when I got hired here, one of the things that takes place is they don't show you a budget before you say yes. And I remember my first week here, I began looking at this budget, and I was like, oh, this is really red. Red's not good. I know that much. Man, I felt pressure and stress. But God's people have been faithful, and over these last 16 months, your generosity and obedience has begun to increase. And I believe with faith, by the end of the year, we're no longer going to be in the red. But God's going to use you to allow us to begin to dream for the future, because we're being responsible with what He's already trusted to us. And stepping out in generosity can be fearful. It can feel like losing. But you're looking at the lens through the wrong way of living. The way of living becomes to be giving, to put others first, to invest in something that's not of your own desire and your own kingdom, but say, God, this is your heart. This is your desire. And I'm going to buy hanging baskets. Why? Because my wife likes them. Also because if it helps kids get to camp, I'd rather help kids get to camp than Costco have them. And so I'm going to invest in hanging baskets. I'm going to invest in this opportunity to send kids to camp where their life can be changed and transformed. We use our gifts to build God's kingdom. We begin to serve one another. Thank you to those of you that have jumped on our teams. There's something that happens when we put our life to serve others. When we use our time to volunteer. Man, when I go out on Tuesdays to the food bank or the clothing bank on Saturdays, and I see people that are literally there just serving, my heart leaps with joy. Because here's what I found. People that serve tend to serve with a smile. They're happy to do it. They're choosing to do it. Do you know what I found a lot of times with people that aren't serving anyone? They're not smiling. They're not happy because their life is self-centered and self-focused. And Jesus' way is to invite yourself to lay your life down and to begin to serve and value others. And then in closing, we become a witness that God has chosen you. No matter what your past has been, no matter where you feel your current situation is, God can use you as a witness. One of the more inspiring times of my life, my dad was confronted with issues that he had to choose which way he was going to go. And sin had gotten a hold of his heart, and he had to step down from pastoring and was just looking for a job, and so he became a bail bondsman. He was literally meeting people at 12 and 1 a.m. in the morning, bailing them out of jail. And he could have viewed himself as a failure, or he could have viewed himself as a continued witness. And even in that journey, he would sit down with people and he'd say, hey, I'm going to sign this paperwork. Before I do, I want to tell you something. Your mistakes don't define you. He's like, I'm the most messed up pastor that you'll meet. But I'm not here to tell you about myself. I'm here to tell you about Jesus, who even in the midst of my difficulty and failure has met me, and he would witness to people. He wasn't allowed to pastor in that moment. He didn't need a pulpit to be a witness. He needed the goodness of God. He needed to choose God's way, and he would sit with people who are in the midst of mistakes, who are in the midst of their own journey. Say, hey, I know the way. I know the way. Sometimes it's a man on a horse And he's got a handlebar mustache, and he's from Mossy Rock, that he meets people and says, hey, I know the way. Other times, it's God using his church. It's using you and me to go into a world and saying, there is a better way. There is a holy way. There is a different way. And not that I'm perfect. And not that I don't have my own issues that I'm working through. But I am clear on the direction I'm heading and clear on the direction that God is calling you to go. And that's what we get to be, his witness. And so don't wait till you're perfect to be his witness, because then Jesus will never have any witnesses. We witness to his perfectness, to his glory, to his love, and we point people to him. So don't let your hearts be troubled. Don't let you get discouraged or lose your way or feel like there's no way forward. There's always a way with Jesus, because he is the way. He is the truth, and he is the life.